I had never shot a nude photograph before Playboy or after. A little bit nervous I was when we were going to shoot the centerfold, but the photographer, Dwight, he was so good, so he made me feel very comfortable.
Hey! Hello!
People were very proud of me, I think. I know everybody thought that the picture was really nice. And then I found out that it was used like all over the world. I was kind of just crazy.
Hey!
There's a secret hidden in every snap, click, and share of your digital life. It is a face more studied than the Mona Lisa and tied to a legacy that changed how we make, use, and see images. This is Lena, the Swedish Playboy model, Miss November 1972, or as others have called her, Tech's original sin. And the story of how she came to be is very symbolic of how women were pushed out of the industry and left out of the industry.
It became a symbol of maybe what is wrong or what can be fixed and made better in the STEM fields for where we've been and where we're hopefully going.
There was a group of engineers working in a USC computer lab testing their image processing algorithms, and they were doing the work that would lead to the JPEG. It just so happened that there was a Playboy magazine lying around the lab, and somebody said, hey, why don't we use the photo in the centerfold?
And thought, oh, that's kind of useful because it has the elements in it that we're interested in, and so they digitized it. Paper about the work they did got published, and then someone else saw the image and it kind of snowballed from there.
Her photo, just a cropped portion of it, quickly became the standard reference for computer scientists looking to test a range of image processing code. This research laid the groundwork for what would later become the JPEG, an image standard that revolutionized our digital world. And with appearances in tens of thousands of journals, educational resources, and books, she remains the most widely used test image in the world.
When I first encountered the Lena image, I was in an artificial intelligence class in high school. Our teacher stood at the front of this class of 30 boys and 2 of us girls and was like, everyone is gonna just go Google it and download the picture and then we'll use it for the algorithm, but don't Google the full image. And so, of course, a bunch of 16-year-olds, what do? Like, all these boys go to the lab and they immediately Google up the full image, and then it becomes this whole thing where everyone's making sexual jokes and like, oh, haha.
An in-joke, you know, like when it goes up on the screen, it's like everyone laughs. Well, not everyone. This is clearly a sign that this is not a space for both men and women.
It really made me feel uncomfortable in that moment and made me feel like women were kind of made to be this joke in the context of this class where I was supposed to be learning as an equal.
For me, the Lena image just symbolizes the role that women have played stereotypically in STEM fields. They have been, you know, the beautiful young woman that's in a photograph, not the woman doing the coding or writing the algorithm.
I think the story to tell here is more about ways that historically we've used women's images, women's voices, women's bodies, while at the same time excluding them from actually doing the work of building the technology.
Swedish accent.
Swedish accent. Mm-hmm.
Konstigt. Och här har vi. Oops! Hela mamma. I first found out that my image was used was a call from a guy in Linköping at the university, and I had no idea. I had no idea what he was talking about. I was asked to come to Boston. It was really strange to see all these people that came up to me and said, "Oh, you're a real person." They told me that they had been looking at my face every day for I don't know how many years. I don't know, they bowed for me. I don't know, I couldn't really take that in.
It sounds odd to say it, but I didn't see it as an image of a person. I looked at it in terms of what does this mean in terms of the algorithms that I was developing to process it. And it wasn't until many years later that I started to see the story around that image and where it came from. And I can absolutely understand now why there is still a debate about whether it was an appropriate image to use and how it came to represent elements of that culture.
So I managed to speak to the professor, William Pratt, who was running the lab at the time. And I said, "Hey, did you think about how this photo might have been a little bit alienating to women?" And he said, it wasn't sexist at all. In fact, there were no women in the classroom at the time. It wasn't a particularly malicious decision. It was certainly an ignorant decision, but in my view, it's the sort of beginning of this half century of passing the buck, of people saying, it's not my problem, or I didn't create this problem.
I think it's easy to look at stories like Lena's and view them as an interesting historical footnote, like a product of its time. But the reality is the culture of an industry is built upon these small, seemingly inconsequential actions. And the fact that they're often done unintentionally doesn't diminish the considerable long-term impact that they can have. We need to be looking at our actions with a critical eye and asking ourselves, what are the decisions that we're making today that will limit the diversity of our workforce tomorrow? In a world that is exponentially more connected and reliant on technology, what are we going to regret not fixing?
In the foreground, Betty Jennings is programming the master programmer. We computed the trajectory of a shell that took 30 seconds to reach its target.
Women, if you go back to the 1940s, actually played a huge role in the early computing industry, and they were making the software. Women were programming computers for the military and programming computers for NASA. In the 60s and 70s, as the tech industry was starting to explode, they were so desperate for new talent that they started doing these personality tests to identify good programmers. These two psychologists, who just happened to be men, decided that good programmers don't like people. They actually wrote this. The research tells us that if you're looking for people who don't like people, you'll hire far more men than women. And so women were essentially pushed and profiled out of an industry that they were already succeeding in.
And then in the early 1980s, the bottom fell out.
You're looking at a small portable computer called the IBM 5100.
Hello, I am Macintosh.
It's interesting that it coincided with the emergence of personal computers that marketed it very much as an interesting thing for males to use.
Are you keeping up with the Commodore? Because the Commodore is keeping up with you.
That is when this stereotype of the antisocial, mostly white male nerd became ingrained.
All right.
And unfortunately, that stereotype persists to this day. When we think of people who can found a successful technology company, we think of Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and people who look like them.
It was tough being one of the only girls in my engineering classes. I constantly second-guessed myself. Almost all, if not all, of my professors were male. Most of my classmates were male. the way I was treated was sort of like my ideas didn't matter. I almost dropped the major a million times, to be honest.
I think a lot of times I would just laugh along because I kind of wanted to fit in. There's this sense of like this tech bro culture and needing to kind of be cool to fit into that.
There have been times where I've walked into office buildings and the question is, oh, who are you visiting? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm a scientist and I work here and I'm about to have a meeting with someone else.
If you're in a culture that is basically giving you signs that you're an imposter, because as a woman, you don't do it the way the male role model does it, then you absorbed that imposter syndrome.
I wore my hair in a bun for 2 years. That's because I wanted to be taken seriously. And luckily, pageants helped me break out of that mold. They showed that you can have beauty and brains. They don't need to be mutually exclusive. Women bring a different dynamic to any form of science, into boardrooms, into leadership positions. I don't think either of our genders are better than the other, but we are totally different.
There were so many years where I felt like I wasn't good enough or I didn't belong. And then years later, I have now learned actually having a different perspective was a breakthrough.
I believe that a male-dominated tech industry means that our potential for innovation is limited because only half of us are represented. We need people solving problems from the way that they uniquely experience the world. And it's not just gender, it's all kinds of diversity.
We need people of all backgrounds, women, minorities, people of different sexualities, geography, age groups.
I think we have everything to lose if we don't get more diversity, and that's not just gender, that's diversity in all senses of the word. Without diverse ideas, we will not progress as a society in any scientific means.
Problem solving benefits from richness of perspectives, richness of ways of thinking about a problem. Without diversity, you're immediately narrowing the pool of ideas that you can draw on in coming up with creative solutions to problems.
This is all about computers. It's the internet that's created the world that we live in. This is the cornerstone of these cultural changes that the whole globe is going through right now. So who's going to be included in that global discourse? A lot of that depends on making sure that the computer industry is diverse.
My biggest fear is that if we continue and we don't address the gender gap, that fewer and fewer and fewer women will have technology skills. And when the future of work has automation and machine learning, where will women be?
I think there's some particular risks around AI. As we hand over a lot of our decision-making to computing algorithms, that a small number of people can create a technology that is used by millions or tens of millions or billions of people. And so you get this multiplier effect where the biases or blind spots that are carried by a small number of people developing a technology can influence enormous numbers. So you get this much greater multiplier effect, and I think that's probably the single biggest risk that we run.
Very early voice recognition systems did not hear women. They did not pick up their voices because the voice recognition systems were designed and calibrated on male voices.
Amazon has a recruiting technology that trained itself to reject the resumes of women candidates. Amazon was just hiring so many men that the technology just decided that men were better. And so if your resume said the word women or women's, it just automatically rejected you.
If I don't have my voice represented when we become fully digital, when the mathematical model of me is being used to determine what I want before I want it, then I can't be part of the group that makes decisions about how we spend our social capital, how we decide future elections, how we move ourselves forward. And that's the digital divide.
one of the challenges that we face is it is very easy to assume that, oh, this is how it's always been, this is the culture, and it's not really my problem, it's kind of a societal issue, we just need to wait for society to shift it. And yet there is sufficient evidence that there are things that we can do that shift it dramatically and fairly quickly.
It's going to take a community to make this change. This is not we don't have one problem and one solution. When you look at a girl and her life cycle from ages 0 onwards, there's many touch points where we could make up some of the damage that these stereotypes have happened.
For the last decade, we've been trying to improve the gender balance in our computing degrees, and a decade of effort had meant that we managed to increase it from 14% female to 16% female. 2 years ago, we said this isn't good enough. We redesigned our computing program from the ground up, and the following year, we had 29% female intake. Structurally, what we did was add a second major into the program, so students have to study a computing major, but then they have to study a second major from elsewhere in the university. And that seems to have made all the difference in the world. It meant that the degree became less about who's the best coder to being more about who actually understands the problems that we're dealing with. And I think that has led to a kind of a step change in the diversity in our programs.
There are lots of obvious things that we can do to make the tech industry more welcoming. More women in executive leadership is one that gets said a lot, and it's really important.
Women-led companies get just 2% of funding. In an industry that calls itself a meritocracy, there's no way that women have only 2% of good ideas. These numbers show not a difference in ambition or ability or willingness to take risk. This is a difference that is a result of access to opportunity and socialization.
I'm an engineer and I make all kinds of stuff. DIYs, life hacks, robots.
What I'm trying to do with Goldie Blocks is say, hey, here's a girl engineer who you want to be like. I fly out to New York for the toy fair. They all sort of looked at me with pity and said, this is a noble cause, but it will never go mainstream. And so I decided, well, you know what? I'm going to put this up on Kickstarter. And before I know it, I've sold almost $1 million of Goldie Blocks in pre-orders online. Less than 6 months later, I'm back at Toy Fair again, having won 2 Toy of the Year awards. 6 years later, and all of the toy companies are starting to follow Goldie Blocks' playbook. Major retailers have taken down their gendered labeling of their toy aisles. You see construction toys that are very clearly for, everyone.
What is gender? Gender is the cultural role that we play. So that's very distinct from biological sex. And again, in our society, we very often confuse the two. Everything that people think is sort of naturally male or naturally female, you will find some culture where that's exactly reversed.
Out of a Christmas present given to a child may come a man's career.
I think that this belief system in the computer gene, the innate talent, is so faulty from top to bottom, and that it is really a question of opportunity. The teachers would often say, that kid, you can just tell he's born to do it. But when we did these interviews in the LA schools, we found out that those were the kids that went to computer summer camps. They were the ones who had a robot under their Christmas tree.
And we're seeing a huge drop-off where girls from ages 6 to 7 start believing that intelligence is an innate male trait. That's really damaging, because what that means is they become disengaged with science, with technology, with maths. It's because they don't believe they have it in themselves.
Tech has a brand problem, like a perception problem that we need to change. There's 80% of girls who aren't being reached because they look at it and they go, that's not for me. Tech's just a tool. What we're trying to teach people is about innovation and creativity, and that's gender neutral. There's nothing in the genes that would say that one gender's more creative than the other.
The subpopulations that get left out in computer science education are women and students of color. So here at Mendes, we have started an initiative called Computer Science for All, where every incoming 9th grade student takes an intro to computer science.
I feel like it might be the way we might have been raised. Like you have this whole like stigma of like women, they go clean and they go do housework. I don't think they're grown up with maybe the knowledge that they could pursue something in the science or math field.
I really like the problem solving, like the fact that it's just like at the end, like there's many ways to do it, but like at the end you always get the same answer.
I want to become a mathematician in NASA or a veterinarian.
Make sure that you're answering this individually. So A, event-driven programs do not implement algorithms. B, some portions of an event-driven program may never execute while the program is running.
Why would we make computer science not optional at Mendes High School? Because we know it's not optional in life.
Go ahead and hold up your board when you're ready.
It's not that I am not good at computer science. I just didn't want to take that class. It's my choice. And that illusion of choice is what then perpetuates more of the same. To refuse or to limit someone's impact for all of us by allowing them to make a choice they're not fully understanding would be to limit ourselves. And to limit the voice is to limit the power.
So change is difficult. Change in a society is difficult because, again, all these things are kind of connected to other things. They're connected to the stories we tell. They're connected to the language that we use. People feel very uncomfortable thinking that these ideas and things that they've grown up with, that they've embodied and embraced throughout their lives, may be somehow wrong or challenged.
There is always a risk of repeating mistakes if we don't understand them. So I think it is crucial that we kind of understand our history. I think historically, we weren't even willing to accept that we had blind spots. We just said, that's the way it is. Now, I think we often still have those blind spots, but we're more willing to acknowledge that they exist. And that's kind of the first step.
Ev Williams, who's the co-founder of Twitter, told me that he thinks if more women had been on the early Twitter team, that online harassment and trolling wouldn't be such a problem. Imagine if the internet was a friendlier place, or if video games were less violent, or if porn wasn't so ubiquitous. I think the internet and the world would be very different if women had had a seat at the table 30 years ago. And we don't want to be asking these same questions in 30 years.
We're on the precipice of a huge change. What's at risk is generational inequality, the scope of which we can't fully comprehend. Now is the time for us to be examining our actions, like looking to the past, learning from our mistakes so that we can move forward. We can replace unintentional bias with intentional positive action.
I was proud about that picture. I thought it was pretty nice. At the time, I don't think we thought about that it was wrong. I think it was, well, this is the way it is. I really think it's different today than it was back in the 70s. It's a man's world, or it was. I think we're coming a long way, but there's a lot of work to do, and everybody has to take their part. Once upon a time, I was the centerfold of Playboy, but I retired from modeling a long time ago. It's time I retired from tech, too.